Coming up, surprise, surprise. In mid-December, the New York Football Giants have a very clear path to the playoffs. We break down a handful of games this weekend after a Giants win over the Saints, of course, that could spell wild card positioning for Big Blue. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. He's healthy, he's wealthy, he's wise, and we are on the heels of an episode where I broke down how Tommy DeVito is having a real success story in his rookie campaign, talking about the New York Football Giants. And in a world, Andy, that this weekend goes the right way, they could be sitting in 7th position, controlling their destiny in the wild card playoffs.
It is unthinkable, unimaginable, unfathomable that the Giants, if the board plays out the way we hope it plays out on Sunday, would be in the 7th spot in the wild card. After being 2-8, the team left for dead. Everyone discussing whether or not we should have Caleb Williams or Drake May as our quarterback next season. All of a sudden, a funny thing happened on Tommy DeVito, starting at MetLife. Giants reel off 3 wins. While it feels still a little unrealistic to have a legitimate shot at the playoffs, we mentioned their chances of making the playoffs is about 2% overall right now. So not great, but I think you and I were talking pre-show, Adam. The simple answer is this. Until the Giants lose another game, the playoffs are in sight. Like we just said it, the 7th seed is in sight if things happen. If you're that close, we have to have optimism going into these games, even though we're going to be underdogs in every game we play the rest of the season.
And that is why, starting with, obviously, the first thing that needs to happen is the Giants need to beat the Saints. And tomorrow we'll be doing our game day preview and talking about key matchups and really looking at the Saints as a team and saying they're an excellent defense. But we've seen the Giants team go up against some pretty good offenses and be able to slow them down and force turnovers. And, hey, Derek Carr, yeah, he might want to give us a couple of those. So we'll break that down in full. But the premise starts with that. The Giants are going to beat the Saints this week. Then we get into a conversation around some of these other key games. And there's one really here that sets the table. I'll go ahead and hit this. And Andy, accurately here, Giants Daily threw this out. The New York Football Giants can jump into the 7th seed this week if these 5 things happen. Obviously, the Giants beat the Saints, first and foremost. The Bucs beat the Packers. We talked about this before. That feels like a matchup that could go either way. We'll discuss numbers here over on FanDuel in a minute. The Commanders beat the Rams. That's the first one where you go, okay, we got to have a little discussion here about the Commanders, a bad football team, but they can move the ball offensively. Sam Howell's been good, although they've struggled of late. Eagles beating the Seahawks, of course. Come on, bounce back game for the Eagles. They just lost to the Cowboys. But then you get into the real muck and the mire of it. The Carolina Panthers need to beat the Atlanta Falcons. If those 5 things happen, which would be 2 underdogs getting in the door there, 3 if you include the Giants getting their win, the Giants would find themselves at the end of this week in the playoff position. And the hardship here is Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers winning a football game, that's not something that they've shown us they're capable of doing that much this season.
Adam, you know what's crazy? When we were talking about this pre-show, and you said Carolina Panthers, relying on them at 1-12 to win a game against any other NFL football team is
college
a stretch.
Football teams.
But you know what's crazy is the Philadelphia Eagles are favored on the road against the Seattle Seahawks.
Yes.
But outside of that favorite, all the other games are underdogs, and the Carolina Panthers are the smallest underdog of all the teams mentioned. You talked about the Giants, the Bucs, the Panthers, and the Commanders. The Commanders are 6.5, but the Panthers, Giants, and Buccaneers all are over 3.5 point underdogs. So, like, when you think about the realistic things that could happen, you think more favorably about the Commanders getting 6.5 points against the Rams than you do the Carolina Panthers at home getting 3 against the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and by the way, because we've talked about this too, the Atlanta Falcons, I think we said this a couple episodes ago, they do represent, and I don't know, because Andy and I have been having a lot of text exchanges around this. Then we're going to use some of the simulation machine. I'm not going to get in the weeds on it, but there's been a lot going on between us back and forth. But the Atlanta Falcons represent like one of the more dangerous teams when it comes to the Giants making the playoffs, certainly just because their schedule maybe breaks down nicely, et cetera. You don't have the head-to-head that you're getting with the Saints or you're getting with the Rams. But the reason why I say like maybe Carolina at home, right? And it's not as big as a spread as you might think, is because it's not like Atlanta has been this stalwart of consistency over the course of the year, right? Is Desmond Ridder the right guy? Have they been able to be successful given that they have Drake London and they have Kyle Pitts and they have Robinson, right? Like they have a lot of weapons for a team that is not necessarily performed that way week in and week out, especially from an offensive perspective. And then here's what I'm curious about. And I'm doing this in real time. The Carolina Panthers only have, as you say, one win. But when we go back and look at it here, the recent games, 28-6 to the Saints. That, that's not great. But 17-10 against the Titans, 21-18 against the Bucks. They got beat up by the Cowboys, as everybody does. We're one of those teams. They lost 16-13 to the Bears, like 15-13 to the Texans. There is this thing. When they get blown out, they get blown out, right? Early in the season, 42-24, 42-21 against the Lions and against the Dolphins. Listen, bad teams lose football games. That's the nature of it. It's why you can be close and still lose. It's what we said about the Giants for most of this season. So, I don't have an incredible level of confidence, and yet I can understand why, it's the NFL. No team is so far away, really, from a talent standpoint. It probably ends up coming down to, does Bryce Young make one or two more good plays as opposed to one or two more bad plays, as young quarterbacks are wont to do?
Well, here's the question, Adam. With
Yeah.
all of those different things that the Giants need,
Yes.
obviously having the tiebreaker against Green Bay is huge,
Yes.
considering we just beat them. We have the Rams coming up. Obviously, we have the Saints coming up. So we kind of control the head-to-head matchups against them, which if we end up running the table, gets the tiebreaker. The question is the Seahawks, right? Like, I know that they're playing the Eagles.
Yep.
And I know that the Eagles haven't, like, they have a great record, but they have not looked good. The Seahawks have the tiebreaker against the Giants. The Seahawks are not going to be winning their division because that's going to go to San Francisco. If Seattle finds a way to beat Philadelphia, and they're only a 3.5-point underdog, that feels like it takes a lot of wind out of the Giants' sail in terms of looking at the playoffs, right?
Well, it's interesting, right? So I'm using this fancy little simulator that Andy pointed me towards. And when you run through these numbers and you say, okay, Panthers win, Bucks win, Giants win, Commanders win, Eagles win, I'm just going in order the way the schedule lays it out. The Giants increase just on that alone to a 10% chance to make the playoffs. And you may say, well, 10% chance? I thought you said they're going to be in the 7th seed. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of stuff they got to do here. They've been bad. They were only under a 2% chance to make it as it is right now. If you flip it to Seattle beating the Eagles, it plummets it down to about a 5% chance, right? And it's because you just keep one more team in your way and one more team that the Giants are not going to see before the season concludes. So, Falcons are critical here. Again, we're associating ourselves as beating the Rams and beating the Saints, obviously. But the Seattle Seahawks, for as bad as they've been, losing games and having a dinged up Geno Smith and all that stuff, it's like they still represent. And you said this a couple episodes ago, too, by the way, about how, remember, early in the year, you think this about a team. And then 4 games later, all of a sudden it flips. And then 4 games later, it flips again. I am concerned. It's a Pete Carroll coached Seattle Seahawks team that was very good last year. Like, there's a world where their quote flip comes now. And combined with the fact that the Eagles are a struggling team right now, which is all the more worse. Because if the Eagles, coming off a loss to the Cowboys, then again lose to the Seattle Seahawks,
you wouldn't want to be the team playing them next, right?
You'd hate to be the team standing in their path coming up next, and that would be the New York Football Giants. And we may say there's still a world to get there when you lose that game, but there could be like a demoralizing game coming if it goes that way. Although I know I'm running long-winded because this is like kind of what happens with this stuff. It's also like, but if the Eagles are losing that many games, you know what I mean? Like they're not the same team they once were a few weeks ago.
Well, so Adam, I think that the thing that you have to do if you're a Giants fan is do the 7-seed parlay, right? Like, bet responsibly, gamble responsibly, but all of the outcomes that you want the Giants to have, the Buccaneers winning outright, the Giants winning outright, the Carolina Panthers winning, the Washington Commanders, and the Philadelphia Eagles. You take all of them, Adam. I know you're going to love this. What do you think the odds are on those things to happen on FanDuel right now?
on all 5 of those games going the way the Giants need them to go.
Yep.
I'm gonna. It's got to be big because you got 3 underdogs going in there with
We
the
got
Bucks, the
4.
Panthers, and the Giants. I mean, it's got to clear. I'm by the way, I'm used to this kind of action. You know what I mean? I know how to live in these waters. I'm gonna say it's something like plus 2,200, plus 22.
It's 125 to 1.
That's seismically larger.
5 times larger. You kind of thought it was going to be 22 to 1. It's 125 to 1 because you need the Buccaneers, the Giants, the Panthers, and the Commanders, who are all underdogs, to win outright. And then you need the Philadelphia Eagles. It is a tremendous number, Adam. Like, and so I think, knowing you as well as I know you from being on OGP, there is no doubt in my mind that you are absolutely going to be taking that at some point this weekend.
Well, you know what's nuts too, man? Like, how about the fact, because now I'm in it, and I'm clicking through them because it's insane. My plus, so around plus 2,000 or 20 to 1. Those odds, Bucks to win outright, Giants to win outright, Panthers to win outright. That's 20 to 1 odds for those 3 underdogs to come out clutch. So, it's like this really comes down to when you add a 4th and a 5th leg, it just makes things that much more seismic in terms of odds. So any combination of those things obviously is going to get you a long way here for the New York Football Giants. Again, unlikely, and we're going to turn our page just beyond this as well in a second. But to bring it back to the top, this is what we're talking about with the New York Football Giants, that in spite of everything that's gone on for this team to start this season, injuries and poor play and whatever else you want to say, they find themselves going into week 15 saying, oh, if things break right, and while it may not seem likely after this weekend, if it breaks right, we will control our own destiny when it comes to making the playoffs because we'll have the playoff seed. Now, can we beat the Eagles twice and the Rams? Whatever. That's for next week. But for right now, you'd say we are in a wild card position. And I know fans may not want to hear it. That is something to hang your hat on, no matter how the season ends, that in week 15, you were in a wild card position after everything that happened this year.
I mean, the NFL got it right when they moved it to 7 playoff spots in each conference because it keeps fan bases and teams alive.
Of course. Yeah. Without this, by the way.
without the 7 seed being there, that you'd feel like the Giants could win out and they would have a 5% chance of making the playoffs just because there's just no room at the end. But when you think about it, in conference, there are 16 teams. The Giants are the 12th team. If they win and these other circumstances happen, they would be in the playoffs. Like, you couldn't script it better if you're the NFL thinking to yourself, man, even the Jets at 5-8, 14th in the AFC, if they win out, hey, they're still alive and they have a whole storyline coming with Aaron Rodgers. So to me, kudos to the NFL for doing this. It just makes fan bases more engaged. All you want is competitive football as you get close to the holidays. The Giants have that, and they may have some more if they can come up with an upset against the Saints.
You better believe it, man. Now, the one thing that I wanted to do here, and it's fast forwarding a little bit because we talk about like chances for the Giants to make the playoffs and the realistic nature of what's going to go on here in this upcoming slate of games. The nice thing about it is if you fast forward, or well, I'm not gonna say the nice thing. I'm gonna say the tricky thing about this, right? Here's the tricky thing about this. If you take away the Panthers game, so you say the Falcons win that game, right? And the Bucks beat the Packers because we want that. And the Giants get the win. And let's say the Commanders do get the upset. If you take away that Commanders one, it actually, by the way, improves the Giants' playoff odds because they play head-to-head. It's one little wrinkle about this scenario. You want the Commanders technically to beat the Rams. You actually don't care because the Commanders, but in theory, are still as much in the mix for something potentially as the Giants are if they were to win football games. But here's the deal. When you go through that, and so you go with the realistic options, Rams win, Bucks win, Falcons win, Giants get the dub, and the Eagles win. When you fast forward the week later, it becomes really interesting to watch the Colts taking on the Falcons. The Packers then, here's the problem, play the Panthers. The Panthers are such a disaster for the New York Football Giants because they keep popping up on the schedules of teams that matter. Now, the nice thing about it is the Giants got that win against the Packers, so equal records, it isn't going to matter. But this is why the push and pull of this, man, is so fraught with peril.
Well, and that's why, like, you can run yourself ragged, and Adam is a sucker for a good simulator. Mock draft season is his favorite time of the year, and so listen, there's so many different scenarios and variables that the Giants just can't control, which is why you and I think are in agreement that, like, yeah, it's fun to kind of like say, well, what happens if this team upsets this team in a different game on Saturday as opposed to this? But in reality, all that matters is week to week, the Giants have a game coming up. They are essentially must-win games, especially the Saints and the Rams,
Well, yeah.
knowing that you have to get the head-to-head against both of them. There is a world and there is a scenario where the Giants go 3-1 over their last 4 games, lose 1 game to Philadelphia, and still have a very small chance if everything else breaks the right way in hopes of making the playoffs. But you and I both agree it's game by game. Win the game in front of you. Don't concern yourself with anything else, and you cannot lose against the Saints and the Rams if you're a Giants fan.
100%. And the last little note that I'll give you here on that, what you mentioned, how if the Giants go 3-1, and this was my pushback on the whole 90 percenters and everything else. Just the idea that if you want to go realistically, let's say that that final game doesn't matter for the Eagles, and the Giants are going to lose once and win once against them. If you put them in for a 3-1 record over their final 4 games, and you don't even have to go extreme, go with the scenario. The Falcons win this week. The Bucks win. Yeah. The Rams get the win over the Commanders. The Eagles get the win. Okay, like all reasonable things around the spreads. You follow that up the following week and you start watching for the Colts against the Falcons, for the Titans against the Seahawks, for the Lions against the Vikings. Depending on how those games break down, the Giants jump. They get into a real world scenario where 45 to 65% chance to make the playoffs is on the table. So again, that's why I say, let's not live in a somewhat microscopic world where the Giants go undefeated and beat the Eagles twice, who may need victories down the stretch. But 8-9 is a real world scenario for the Giants to make the playoffs. And it can happen because when you look at all these scenarios, a lot of teams play one another. The Falcons and the Rams and the Packers and the Lions, division games, the Vikings get in the mix there too, because they all get jumbled up. All you're asking for is for everybody to kind of go 500 and for you to go 3-1, and all of a sudden you get the deal done.
Yeah, I think that, not to labor the point, but because these teams play each other, you don't necessarily know what you're rooting for yet until this week happens and you see who's won and who's lost. And then next week you can go back and say, well, I need that team to go back down to 500 or under 500. So
Right.
a lot of things need to go on for the Giants to really feel confident about where they're going. But hey, the New Orleans Saints are on the docket on Sunday. That's really all I'm going to be caring about. But if you like to be, torture yourself like Adam does sometimes, just keep an eye on those games that we mentioned before.
And by the way, man, at the end of the day, so to speak, very quickly here as we get out the door, a reminder that when you go over and look at the playoff picture right now, because it's Thursday night football, we've got a barn burner between the LA Chargers and the Vegas Raiders. Bad news. Neither one of them is firing themselves up the chain of command. And I say that because they're both 5-8. But neither one of those teams in the AFC is going to be thinking about making the playoffs. You got Herbert done for the year. The Raiders have been a mess. They just had a 3-0 loss in an NFL football game. Do you care? Are you interested? The Chargers are getting 3.5. They're plus 140 on the line. What do you like?
I mean, Adam, talk about what the NFL was
Is
not
not.
hoping for. Is this basically? Think about this. Going into it, you're like, wow, look at this star-studded matchup. You've got Justin Herbert throwing it to Keenan Allen, and you've got Jimmy Garoppolo, dumping it off to Josh Jacobs.
Doesn't
None
exist.
of those players are playing in this game right now.
That's right.
It is Aiden O'Connell versus Easton Stick. And Easton Stick is starting his first game. Don't know what to expect. We kind of know what to expect from Aiden O'Connell, who, only had his
Tommy
best game
DeVito's better than
against the
him.
New York Football Giants, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any sense of what you think is going to happen in this game, considering half the players that are normally playing are not even going to be available tonight?
Yeah, I think this game's a bit of a mess. First start for the Chargers there, as you say. I'll go with the Raiders. I'll go with the heartstrings. Antonio Pierce, he's the interim head coach. I want him to get a good shot here. They had a really rough game, but they seem like a team not totally dissimilar to the Giants, right? Like they're kind of trying to scrap their way by, dealing with a lot of injuries all year. And frankly, the Chargers are far more talented on paper, but they've been terrible. But they don't win. I like their coach is awful. So I'll go with the young coach, the rookie coach. Give me the Raiders to get the dub.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. Rookie quarterback on the road with Brandon Staley as your coach doesn't seem to really instill confidence. With no Keenan Allen, No Mike Williams. Obviously, he's been out for a while. It looks bleak to me. But go ahead.
No, just real quick. Both these teams are defensively coached in terms of their head coaches. And it's something like Colin Cowherd pointed this out. It's like 11 out of the 14 teams that are in the playoffs right now have offensive coaches as their head coach, not defensive coaches. So it's just like, guess what? When the guy at the helm is defensive minded and you have to trust somebody else, or it's just not good, or game management, there is a theme here around who's at the helm here. So good news, Brian Dable, offensive mind.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is when you have a defensive coach and then the defense isn't playing great, that also doesn't help
Doesn't
you.
help
At
you.
least
Yeah.
Antonio Pierce can hang his hat on the fact that they gave up 3 points against the
Right.
Minnesota
Right.
Vikings
Right.
in a loss.
Yeah.
But they gave up 3 points, weren't able to score offensively. At least you could turn around and say, I have that side of the house figured out. That's why I have more confidence in the Raiders tonight. I mean, Adam, you like some of the anytime touchdown stuff. Why not take the Raiders defense to score against a rookie QB on the road on a short week? Like that to me seems like why not just throw a couple shekels on that one.
Dude, I don't like it. I love it. I'm locked in on that one. We'll be locked in on maybe some Thursday night football. There's probably some other sporting events like hockey going on tonight. You might want to just, come on. There's other games. NBA is going to be playing. I got a Nets game to watch against the Denver Nuggets. A lot of things happening here. Until next time, though, which will be our preview matchup against the New Orleans Saints. How do we think the Giants can get that win? Why are we maybe a little bit bullish about the Giants getting what would be a 4th straight win for them here late in the season? We'll break all that down, which means you need to be over on YouTube, subscribe, turning on your alerts so you know when we're going live with those. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast needs as well. And then over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, and at Adam Armbrecht. We'll be breaking it down tomorrow, giving our official picks, and also the weekend ahead here, right? Guess what? We may be picking a lot of the games we talked about the Giants needing to go their way. We'll dive into it all, but until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.